The tears streaming down Madeline Porter's face caught the sunlight as she stood alone in front of the church, her white wedding dress gathering dust in the hot Texas afternoon of 1875. The man she was supposed to marry, the man who had promised her the world, was nowhere to be found. "He ain't coming, Miss Porter," Sheriff Thompson said quietly, removing his hat as a gesture of respect. "Found his room empty at the boarding house. Seems Thomas cleared out before dawn." Madeline's gloved hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet of wildflowers, now wilting in the summer heat. The whispers of the townsfolk who had gathered to witness what should have been the happiest day of her life now filled her ears with shame. "Poor girl. Always knew that city fellow was no good. What will she do now?" The question hung in the air like the dust kicked up by departing carriages. Families were already leaving, no doubt eager to spread the news across Rattlesnake Creek that Madeline Porter had been abandoned at the altar by Thomas Gentry, the railroad investor from back east. "Come on, Maddie," her mother urged, trying to guide her away from the church steps. "Let's get you home." But Madeline couldn't move. Moving meant accepting what had happened. Moving meant facing a future she hadn't planned for, one without the security and status Thomas had promised. At 22, she would now be marked as damaged goods in the eyes of proper society. "Please, just give me a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the crowd dispersed and her parents retreated to their wagon to wait, Madeline stood frozen, a statue in white lace against the weathered wood of the church. That's when she noticed him leaning against the hitching post across the dusty street, watching her with an intensity that made her straighten her spine despite her heartbreak. Blake Donovan. The cowboy who ran the neighboring ranch. The man who had warned her about Thomas 6 months ago. The man whose kiss she had never quite forgotten, though she'd tried desperately to. Their eyes met across the distance, and Madeline felt a flush of embarrassment. Of all the people to witness her humiliation, why did it have to be him? The one who had told her the truth when she refused to hear it. Blake pushed away from the post and crossed the street with long, confident strides. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, and his dark hair curled slightly beneath his well-worn hat. Unlike the other onlookers, there was no pity in his eyes, only a determined glint that made her heart skip despite her sorrow. He stopped at the bottom of the church steps and looked up at her. "Miss Porter," he said simply, his voice deep and steady. "Mr. Donovan," she replied, fighting to keep her voice from cracking. "Come to say you were right about him all along?" Blake removed his hat, revealing the full intensity of his blue eyes. "No, madam. That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you?" He climbed 3 steps until he was standing just below her, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him. "I'm here because I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you home." He extended his hand, calloused and strong. "And perhaps, if you're willing, to ask for a second chance." Madeline stared at his outstretched hand. "A second chance at what, Mr. Donovan?" "At proving to you that not all men will walk away when things get difficult." His eyes softened. "At showing you that some promises are meant to be kept." The rest of the world seemed to fade away as Madeline looked at Blake's hand, then back to his face. She'd rejected him once before, choosing Thomas's smooth words and promises of wealth over Blake's honest offer of partnership. Now here he was, offering her dignity when she needed it most. With a trembling hand, she placed her fingers in his palm. "I can't promise anything right now," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for promises, Miss Porter." His fingers closed gently around hers. "Just a chance to walk beside you." As Blake led her down the church steps toward his waiting horse, Madeline felt the weight of the townsfolk's stares. But for the first time since discovering Thomas's betrayal, she also felt something else, a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Blake helped her onto his horse, carefully arranging her wedding dress before mounting behind her. As they rode away from the church, Madeline leaned slightly against his solid chest, drawing strength from his presence. "Where to, Miss Porter?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. For a moment, she considered asking him to take her to her parents' home. But the thought of facing their disappointment and concern was too much to bear. Could you take me to the river? She asked instead. I need some time to think before I face everyone. Blake nodded, guiding his horse away from town and toward the winding creek that gave their settlement its name. As they rode in silence, Madeline became acutely aware of the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back, reliable, unwavering, much like the man himself. The journey to the river took them through meadows dotted with wild flowers and along trails shaded by ancient cottonwood trees. By the time they reached the banks of Rattlesnake Creek, the afternoon sun had softened, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Blake dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hand spanned her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. When her feet touched the earth, he didn't immediately step back, and Madeline found herself looking up into his face, suddenly conscious of how close they were standing. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping away and smoothing her dress, the beautiful wedding gown that now symbolized her humiliation. Blake secured his horse to a nearby tree and removed his saddlebags. "Might want to sit for a spell," he suggested, nodding toward a flat boulder near the water's edge. "You've had quite a day." Madeline gathered her skirts and made her way to the rock, sinking down gratefully. Her feet ached in the tight white boots she'd chosen for her wedding day. As she looked out over the flowing water, the reality of her situation began to settle around her like a heavy blanket. "He didn't even leave a note," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Not a word of explanation. Just gone." Blake sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Some men aren't worth the paper their words would be written on." "I believed him." Madeline's voice caught. "Every promise, every plan for our future. I believed it all. That's not your failing, Miss Porter. That's his." She turned to look at him, really look at him for perhaps the first time. Blake Donovan had been a fixture in Rattlesnake Creek since before she could remember. His family's ranch bordered her father's land, and they'd grown up attending the same church socials and town meetings. But it wasn't until she'd returned from finishing school in St. Louis 2 years ago that she'd begun to see him as a man rather than just a familiar face. "Why did you come today, Mr. Donovan?" "Truly?" she asked. Blake picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands before skipping it across the water. "I knew what kind of man Thomas Gentry was. I've met his type before, men who see our town as nothing but an opportunity to exploit. When I heard he hadn't shown up for the wedding," he paused, meeting her gaze directly, "I knew you'd be hurting. And I couldn't stand the thought of you facing that alone. Even after I chose him over you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Even then." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gentle sound of the water and the occasional call of birds in the trees above them. Madeline found the knot of tension in her chest beginning to loosen, just slightly. "Would you like some water?" Blake asked, reaching for his canteen. She nodded gratefully, accepting the container. As she drank, she noticed him watching her with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked, handing back the canteen. "I was just thinking that even with tear-stained cheeks and a dusty wedding dress, you're still the most beautiful woman in the territory." The unexpected compliment brought a flush to her cheeks. "Mr. Donovan, I don't think Blake," he interrupted gently. "After everything, I think you might call me Blake." "Blake," she repeated, finding she liked the way his name felt on her lips. "Then I suppose you should call me Madeline." "I've always preferred Maddie," he admitted. "If you don't mind?" The nickname, used only by those closest to her, felt intimate coming from him. Yet strangely, she didn't object. "Maddie it is, then." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Madeline realized they would need to return to town soon. The thought filled her with dread. "Everyone will be talking," she said quietly. "Let them talk," Blake replied with a shrug. "Gossip dies down eventually. Not in Rattlesnake Creek. They'll remember this for years." Blake turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then give them something else to remember. Something that shows your strength rather than his weakness." "What do you mean?" "I mean don't hide away. Don't let shame keep you locked in your parents' house. Live your life, Maddie. Show them that one man's poor decision doesn't define your worth. His words struck a chord within her. All her life, Madeline had been concerned with appearances and meeting expectations. It was partly why Thomas had appealed to her. He'd offered a life that would impress others. But where had that led her? And what would you suggest I do first? She asked, curious about his perspective. Blake's eyes lit up with an idea. Come to the town social next Saturday. Madeline laughed in disbelief. The social? You can't be serious. Everyone will be staring and whispering. Exactly. He nodded firmly. And when they see you there, head held high, they'll understand that Madeline Porter isn't defined by Thomas Gentry's actions. And if I'm not ready to face them all, then I'll be right beside you, he promised. For as long as you need. Something in his steady gaze made her believe him a quality Thomas had never possessed despite all his flowery words and grand gestures. Very well, Mr. Donovan Blake. She corrected herself. I'll consider your suggestion. As the light began to fade, Blake stood and offered his hand once more. We should head back before dark. Madeline allowed him to help her up, noticing how he made no move to release her hand immediately. The warmth of his touch sent a strange flutter through her chest, a feeling she quickly tried to dismiss as gratitude. They rode back to town as twilight settled over the landscape, the sky painted in shades of pink and purple. Blake kept his horse at a gentle pace, seeming in no hurry to end their time together. When they reached the edge of town, Madeline expected him to take her directly to her parents' house, but he surprised her by stopping at the millinery shop owned by her friend Lucy. I thought you might prefer to avoid the main street, he explained. Lucy can help you change out of your wedding dress before you go home. His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. Thank you. That's very considerate. He helped her dismount and knocked on the shop's back door. Lucy appeared almost immediately, her eyes widening at the sight of Madeline in her wedding gown with Blake Donovan standing protectively at her side. Maddie! Oh, my dear! Lucy exclaimed, pulling her friend into a tight embrace before ushering her inside. She gave Blake a questioning look over Madeline's shoulder. I'll wait out here to escort Miss Porter home when she's ready, he said, stepping back respectfully. Inside the shop, Lucy helped Madeline out of her wedding dress and into a simple blue day dress she kept on hand for customers. As Lucy carefully packed away the white gown, Madeline caught her reflection in the mirror, eyes red-rimmed but clear, shoulders straight, chin lifted. Despite everything, she was still standing. Blake Donovan? Lucy asked quietly, her eyebrows raised in question. He was kind enough to help me avoid the worst of the gossip, Madeline explained, deliberately vague. Lucy wasn't so easily put off. He's been sweet on you for years, you know. Even when you were engaged to Thomas. That's not. We're not. Madeline fumbled for words. I'm just saying, Lucy continued, pinning up a strand of Madeline's hair that had fallen loose. There are worse things than having a man like Blake Donovan waiting outside for you. Madeline had no response to that. When she emerged from the shop, she found Blake leaning against the wall, hat in his hands, staring up at the emerging stars. He straightened immediately when he saw her. Better? He asked, his eyes taking in her changed appearance. Much, she admitted. Though I suspect facing my parents won't be easy regardless of what I'm wearing. Blake offered his arm. Would you like me to speak with your father? The offer surprised her. What would you say? That's between him and me, Blake replied with a slight smile. But I think it might help. Madeline considered his offer as they walked the short distance to her parents' home. By the time they reached the front gate, she had made her decision. Yes, she said quietly. I think I would appreciate that. Blake nodded, squeezing her hand briefly before releasing it as they approached the house. The lamps were lit inside, warm light spilling onto the porch where her father sat in his rocking chair, pipe in hand. He stood as they approached, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Mr. Porter, Blake greeted, extending his hand. I brought your daughter home safe. Madeline's father shook Blake's hand firmly. Donovan. Appreciate you looking after her. Been a difficult day. Pa, Madeline said, stepping forward to embrace her father. I'm sorry for all the trouble and embarrassment. Nonsense, girl, he said gruffly, patting her back. Only one who should be embarrassed is that no-good gentry fellow. Blake cleared his throat. Mr. Porter, might I have a word with you? Man to man? Her father's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Maddie, your mother's in the kitchen. Been worried sick about you. Taking the hint, Madeline touched Blake's arm briefly. Thank you for everything today. I meant what I said, he reminded her quietly. About the social. She gave him a small smile before heading inside, leaving the two men on the porch. Through the window, she could see them engaged in serious conversation, her father listening intently as Blake spoke, gesturing occasionally with his hat in his hands. Madeline's mother rushed to her as soon as she entered the kitchen, enveloping her in a tight embrace that smelled of flower and lavender water. Oh, my poor girl, she murmured, stroking Madeline's hair. When that Donovan boy rode off with you, I was beside myself with worry. Blake was a perfect gentleman, Ma, Madeline assured her. He just helped me find my dignity again. Her mother pulled back, studying her face. And did you find your dignity? Madeline thought about the afternoon by the river, about Blake's unwavering belief in her strength, about the second chance he'd offered her not just at love, but at reclaiming her own sense of worth. I think I'm starting to, she answered honestly. Later that night, after a quiet supper during which her parents carefully avoided mentioning the wedding or Thomas, Madeline sat at her bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Her father had been unusually thoughtful after his conversation with Blake, telling her only that Donovan's a man of substance, before retreating to his study. What had Blake said to him? And more importantly, why did it matter so much to her? As she prepared for bed, Madeline found herself thinking not of Thomas and his betrayal, but of Blake's steady presence, his gentle strength, and the way his eyes had held hers when he asked for a second chance. A chance at what, exactly, she wasn't entirely sure. But for the first time since finding herself alone at the altar, Madeline felt something other than despair when she thought about tomorrow. And that, she decided as she blew out her lamp, was a beginning. The week following what the townspeople had taken to calling the Gentry incident passed in a blur of awkward encounters and whispered conversations that ceased the moment Madeline entered a room. True to Blake's prediction, the gossip was relentless. Stories circulated about Thomas that he'd been running from debts, that he had another wife back east, that he'd stolen money from the railroad company. Whether any of it was true, Madeline couldn't say, but she took small comfort in knowing that public opinion had turned firmly against him. Blake had kept his distance, respecting her need for time to process her emotions. But each morning, she'd awaken to find fresh wildflowers on the porch, never with a note, but she knew who they were from. The gesture both touched and confused her. Was this his way of courting her, or merely offering friendship during a difficult time? By Saturday morning, Madeline had still not decided whether to attend the town social. The thought of facing everyone at once made her stomach churn with anxiety. Yet, she couldn't deny a certain longing to see Blake again, to experience more of the quiet confidence she'd felt in his presence. She was still deliberating when a knock came at the front door shortly after breakfast. Her mother answered it, and Madeline heard the low rumble of a familiar voice that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Maddie, her mother called. Mr. Donovan is here to see you. Taking a deep breath, Madeline smoothed her hair and straightened her simple morning dress before stepping into the parlor. Blake stood by the fireplace, hat in hand, looking more polished than she'd ever seen him. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt with a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Good morning, Miss Porter, he greeted, a smile warming his features. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, she replied, aware of her mother watching them with undisguised interest. Would you care to sit? Actually, I was hoping you might join me for a ride. The weather's fine, and I thought you might appreciate some fresh air." Before Madeline could respond, her mother chimed in. "What a lovely idea! Maddie's been cooped up in this house all week. The air will do her good." She turned to her daughter with a meaningful look. "Why don't you get your shawl, dear?" Recognizing when she was being managed, Madeline excused herself to fetch her shawl and bonnet. When she returned, she found Blake and her mother engaged in friendly conversation about the recent rains and their effect on this year's crops. "Ready?" Blake asked, offering his arm as her mother beamed approvingly. Outside, Blake's horse waited patiently beside a small buggy Madeline didn't recognize. "Where did this come from?" she asked, gesturing to the neat vehicle. "Borrowed it from the Henderson place," he explained, helping her up. "Thought it might be more comfortable than riding double." As they set off, Madeline noticed he wasn't heading toward the river as she'd expected, but instead taking the road that led west out of town. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious. "There's something I want to show you," he replied mysteriously. "If you don't mind a bit of a journey." The morning was indeed beautiful, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. As they left the town behind, Madeline felt the tension gradually easing from her shoulders. Blake kept the conversation light, telling her about a new foal born at his ranch and asking about her family's cattle operation. After about an hour's drive, he turned off the main road onto a narrower trail that wound up into the foothills. The terrain grew more rugged, but the buggy handled it well, and Blake's hands were steady on the reins. "Almost there," he assured her as they crested a small rise. What lay before them took Madeline's breath away. The trail opened onto a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable: blues, purples, yellows, and reds, creating a natural tapestry against the green grass. In the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the sky, their peaks still holding traces of snow despite the summer heat. "Oh, Blake," she whispered, taking in the scene. "It's beautiful." He brought the buggy to a stop at the edge of the meadow and jumped down, coming around to help her descend. "My grandmother showed me this place when I was a boy," he explained. "She called it Heaven's Garden. Said it was where God practiced before making Eden." Madeline stepped carefully into the flowers, which reached nearly to her knees in places. "I've lived here my whole life and never knew this existed." "Few people do," Blake said, watching her with evident pleasure as she moved through the blooms. "It's a special place. One that deserves to be shared with special people." The implication of his words wasn't lost on her. "And is that what I am? Special?" "You've always been special to me, Maddie." The simple honesty in his voice made her turn to look at him. "Even when you couldn't see it yourself." Madeline felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't understand why. I chose another man over you. I rejected your suit without truly considering it." Blake stepped closer, the wildflowers parting around his boots. "You were dazzled by promises of a different life. I can't blame you for that. Thomas offered you the world. I only offered myself. And now you're offering again? After everything?" "I'm offering friendship first," he clarified. "The rest, well, that's up to you. When you're ready." His patience and understanding touched something deep within her. How different he was from Thomas, who had pressed and insisted and rushed her into an engagement before she'd fully recovered from her mother's illness. "I brought something for us to eat," Blake said, gesturing back toward the buggy. "Thought we might have a picnic, if you're amenable." Madeline smiled, grateful for the slight change in subject. "That sounds lovely." From the back of the buggy, Blake produced a basket covered with a checked cloth. He spread a blanket in a relatively flat area among the flowers and began unpacking the contents: bread, cheese, sliced apples, and a jar of preserves. "Did you prepare all this yourself?" Madeline asked, settling onto the blanket. Blake's cheeks colored slightly. "Mrs. Henderson helped with the preserves. But I can manage bread and cheese well enough." They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the mountain view and the gentle buzzing of bees moving among the flowers. Madeline found herself studying Blake when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the capable hands that handled both horses and delicate food with equal care. "You're staring," he noted without looking up from slicing an apple. Caught, Madeline blushed. "I was just thinking how different you are from Thomas." "I should hope so," he replied dryly, offering her a slice of the fruit. "No, I mean," she searched for the right words. "He was always talking about the future, what we would do, where we would live, the life we would have. But somehow, I never felt fully present in those plans. It was as if I was watching someone else's life being mapped out." Blake considered this. "And how do you feel now?" "Now?" Madeline looked around at the beautiful meadow, the clear sky, the man sitting across from her who asked for nothing but her company. "Now I feel very much present." A smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and crinkling the corners. "Good. That's how it should be." After they finished eating, Blake packed away the remains of their picnic and suggested a walk through the meadow. As they strolled side by side, occasionally brushing against each other as they navigated through the flowers, Madeline found herself wondering what it might be like to take his hand, to feel those strong fingers entwined with hers. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured after they had walked in silence for several minutes. "Of course. Why did you never marry? You must have had opportunities." Blake gazed out toward the distant mountains before answering. "I came close once, about 5 years ago. Sarah Matthews, she taught at the school for a year." Madeline vaguely remembered the quiet, pretty teacher who had left town suddenly. "What happened?" Life in Rattlesnake Creek wasn't what she expected. She wanted more excitement, more opportunity than a small cattle town could offer. He shrugged, but Madeline sensed the old hurt beneath his casual gesture. "She left for San Francisco. Married a banker there, I heard." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was for the best." He glanced at her with a half-smile. "Taught me something important, though." "What's that?" "That loving someone means wanting their happiness even if it doesn't include you." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That's why I never pushed you about Thomas, even when I knew he wasn't right for you. You had to discover that for yourself." Madeline felt a rush of emotion at his words, gratitude, admiration, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you for bringing me here today," she said softly. "It's exactly what I needed." "Does that mean you'll come to the social tonight?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. The thought still made her nervous, but looking at Blake's expectant face, Madeline found she couldn't disappoint him. More importantly, she realized she didn't want to disappoint herself by hiding away any longer. "Yes," she decided. "I'll come." The smile that lit up his face was worth any discomfort she might face later. "I'll pick you up at 7, he promised. As they made their way back to the buggy for the return journey, Madeline impulsively reached down and picked a small bunch of wildflowers, blue, purple, and white blooms that reminded her of this perfect afternoon. "For your mother?" Blake asked as he helped her into the buggy. "No," she replied, tucking them carefully into her lap. "For me. To remember today." The ride back to Rattlesnake Creek seemed shorter somehow, filled with easy conversation and occasional comfortable silences. By the time they reached her parents' house, Madeline felt more like herself than she had in months, perhaps even more than she had in years. "Thank you, Blake," she said as he helped her down from the buggy. "For everything." "My pleasure, Maddie," he replied, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "I'll see you tonight." As she watched him drive away, Madeline felt a curious lightness in her chest. For the first time since Thomas's betrayal, she found herself looking forward to the evening ahead rather than dreading it. Inside, her mother was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "Well? Did you have a nice time with Mr. Donovan?" "Yes, Ma," Madeline admitted, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "We had a very nice time. He's a good man," her mother observed, watching as Madeline carefully placed her wildflowers in a small glass of water. "Steady. Reliable. Yes, he is. And handsome too, in a rugged sort of way. Madeline laughed. Ma, are you trying to matchmake? Her mother feigned innocence. I'm merely making observations. A mother is allowed to do that, isn't she? I suppose she is. Madeline smoothed her skirt and took a deep breath. I've decided to attend the social tonight. Blake has offered to escort me. The delight on her mother's face was almost comical. Oh. Well, we must make sure you look your best. Perhaps the green dress with the lace collar? It brings out your eyes so beautifully. As her mother bustled off to press the suggested garment, Madeline touched the petals of her wild flowers, thinking of the meadow and Blake's quiet declaration. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that what had initially seemed like the worst day of her life might actually have been the beginning of something better, something real. The town hall was decorated with paper lanterns and bunting for the monthly social, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilling out into the evening air. Madeline sat beside Blake in his buggy, hands clutched tightly in her lap as they approached the brightly lit building. We don't have to stay long, Blake assured her, sensing her nervousness. Just long enough to show your face and perhaps share a dance or two. Madeline nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. She had taken special care with her appearance, wearing the green dress her mother suggested along with a simple gold locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Her hair was swept up in a style that softened her features, with a few tendrils left loose to frame her face. When Blake had arrived to collect her, the appreciation in his eyes had given her a boost of confidence that was now starting to waver as they drew closer to the gathering. Everyone will be staring, she murmured. Let them, Blake replied simply. They'll have nothing to see but a beautiful woman enjoying an evening out. He brought the buggy to a stop and came around to help her down. Before they reached the hall's entrance, he offered his arm. Ready? Taking a deep breath, Madeline placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. Ready. The moment they stepped through the door, conversation dimmed noticeably. Heads turned, and Madeline felt the weight of dozens of curious gazes. She kept her chin up, focusing on Blake's steady presence beside her. Mayor Wilson's wife was the first to approach, her expression a mixture of sympathy and barely disguised interest. Madeline, dear. How lovely to see you. We weren't sure if you'd join us tonight. I wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Wilson, Madeline replied with a composure she didn't entirely feel. The socials are always such a highlight of the month. Indeed they are. Mrs. Wilson turned her attention to Blake. Mr. Donovan, how nice of you to escort Miss Porter this evening. The pleasure is mine, madam, Blake responded with a polite nod. After Mrs. Wilson moved on, others gradually approached, some with genuine warmth, others clearly fishing for gossip. Blake remained steadfastly at Madeline's side, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back in a gesture of support that gave her strength to continue smiling and engaging in small talk. Lucy appeared with punch for both of them, her eyes sparkling with approval. You look beautiful, Maddie, she said. And you've caused quite a stir arriving with Mr. Donovan here. That wasn't our intention, Madeline began, but Lucy waved away her protest. It's exactly what this town needed, something new to talk about. Trust me, by next week, no one will remember Thomas Gentry's name. The music changed to a lively reel, and several couples moved to the center of the room to dance. Blake set down his punch cup and turned to Madeline with a question in his eyes. Would you care to dance, Miss Porter? Part of her wanted to decline, to avoid drawing more attention. But another part, a stronger part, wanted to step further into this new beginning. I'd be delighted, Mr. Donovan. Blake led her to the dance floor, and as they joined the other couples, Madeline was acutely aware of the whispers and glances. But when Blake's hand settled at her waist and the other clasped hers, those concerns began to fade. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent his days on horseback, leading her through the steps with confidence and care. You dance well, she commented as they circled each other. My mother insisted all her sons learn properly, he explained with a smile. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like an injured buffalo. The image made Madeline laugh, drawing curious glances from nearby dancers. She realized with surprise that it was the first time she had laughed aloud since the wedding day disaster. As the evening progressed, Madeline found herself relaxing more, even accepting dance invitations from other men in the town: the doctor's son, the blacksmith, and Sheriff Thompson himself. But her gaze kept returning to Blake, who watched her with quiet approval from the sidelines. When the fiddler finally struck up a waltz, Blake appeared at her side again, hand extended in invitation. This dance was slower, more intimate, and as they moved together across the floor, Madeline became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For encouraging me to come tonight. For standing beside me. For making me feel like Madeline Porter again, not just the woman who was left at the altar." Blake's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You've always been more than what happened to you, Maddie. I'm just glad you're starting to see it too." As the music drew to a close, either of them moved immediately to separate. They stood in the center of the floor, gazes locked, until someone nearby cleared their throat, breaking the moment. Blake stepped back, but kept hold of her hand. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" Madeline nodded, suddenly needing escape from the warm, crowded room. He led her through the dancers and out onto the small porch that fronted the town hall. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, and the stars overhead seemed especially bright. They weren't alone. A few other couples had sought refuge from the heat of the hall, but there was enough space to find a quiet corner by the railing. Blake stood beside her, both of them looking out at the main street of Rattlesnake Creek, softly lit by the glow from shop windows and street lamps. "I used to dream about leaving this town," Madeline confessed after a comfortable silence. "I thought there must be something more exciting waiting for me somewhere else." "And now?" Blake asked. She considered the question honestly. "Now I'm not so sure. There's a certain beauty in knowing a place completely, its seasons, its rhythms, the people who make it what it is." "Is that why you agreed to marry Thomas? Because he promised to take you away?" "Partly," she admitted. "He painted such vivid pictures of the life we'd have, the cities we'd visit, the people we'd meet. It all seemed so glamorous compared to raising cattle and attending church socials." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "There's nothing wrong with wanting more from life, Maddie. The question is whether what you're reaching for is actually what will make you happy." His insight surprised her. "When did you get so wise, Blake Donovan?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "Spend enough time alone with your thoughts on the range, you either go mad or figure a few things out." She laughed softly, then shivered as a cool breeze swept across the porch. Without hesitation, Blake removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body and carried his scent: leather, soap, and something uniquely him. "Better?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, thank you." Madeline pulled the jacket closer, feeling strangely protected within its folds. Inside, the music had changed again, the lively notes drifting out to where they stood. Blake leaned against the railing, studying her face in the dim light. "May I ask you something, Maddie?" "Of course." "Do you regret it? Saying yes to Thomas?" The question caught her off guard, but she gave it the consideration it deserved. "I regret that I didn't see him for who he truly was. I regret the public humiliation and the pain it caused my family." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But no, I don't entirely regret it. If I hadn't said yes to him, I might have spent my life wondering what I'd missed. And? Blake prompted when she hesitated. "And if he hadn't left me at the church, you wouldn't have been there to pick up the pieces. We wouldn't be here now." The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate fully. Blake straightened from the railing and took a step closer to her. "Maddie, there you are!" Lucy's voice interrupted whatever Blake had been about to say. She appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. "Maddie, your mother's looking for you. Says it's getting late and your father's ready to head home." The moment broken, Madeline nodded. "Thank you, Lucy. We'll be right in." When Lucy had disappeared back inside, Madeline turned apologetically to Blake. I should go find my parents. He nodded, though she thought she detected disappointment in his expression. Of course. Let me take you back inside. As they entered the hall, Madeline was aware of how different the atmosphere felt from when they had first arrived. The curious stares had largely given way to friendly nods, and she felt a surge of gratitude toward Blake for helping her face this first public appearance after her humiliation. They found her parents near the refreshment table, her father looking decidedly ready to leave while her mother chatted animatedly with the minister's wife. "There you are, Maddie," her father said with evident relief. "Ready to head home?" "Yes, Pa," she replied, then turned to Blake. "Thank you for escorting me tonight. I had a wonderful time." "The pleasure was mine," he said formally, mindful of her parents' presence. "Perhaps I might call on you tomorrow afternoon? The weather's supposed to be fair." Before Madeline could respond, her mother jumped in. "That would be lovely, Mr. Donovan. Madeline could show you the new roses I've planted in the garden." Blake's eyes remained on Madeline, waiting for her answer. "I'd like that," she said softly. As they prepared to leave, Madeline began to remove Blake's jacket from her shoulders, but he stopped her with a gentle hand. "Keep it for now," he said. "The night's grown cool." The simple gesture didn't go unnoticed by her parents or the other departing guests, but Madeline found she didn't mind. Let them talk. For once, the gossip might be about something hopeful rather than scandalous. As her father helped her mother into their wagon, Blake took the opportunity to speak privately to Madeline one last time. "You were the most beautiful woman there tonight," he said quietly. "Even with all the whispers and stares? Especially then." His eyes were warm in the lamplight. "Good night, Maddie." "Good night, Blake," she replied, surprised by the reluctance she felt to leave his company. On the short ride home, her mother chattered happily about the social who had worn what, which couples had danced together, the quality of the refreshments. Her father remained silent until they were nearly home, then cleared his throat meaningfully. "Donovan seems to have serious intentions," he observed, his eyes on the road ahead. "Pa, it's still very early," Madeline protested, though her heart beat faster at his words. "Just saying what I see," he replied with a shrug. "Man doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at you unless he's got intentions." Madeline said nothing, but as they pulled up to their house, she found herself wondering about those intentions and, more surprisingly, about her own growing feelings for the steady cowboy who had asked for a second chance. Later, as she prepared for bed, Madeline carefully hung Blake's jacket on the back of her chair, letting her fingers linger on the sturdy material. The evening had been a turning point, she realized. Not just in how the town saw her, but in how she saw herself and perhaps in how she saw her future. The following weeks brought a gradual but unmistakable change to Madeline's life. Blake called on her regularly, sometimes taking her for drives in the buggy, other times simply sitting with her on the porch of her parents' home, talking as the sun set over the distant hills. They developed a comfortable routine, yet there was nothing routine about the feelings growing between them. True to Lucy's prediction, the town's interest in the Gentry incident faded as new gossip emerged. The banker's daughter eloping with a traveling salesman provided particularly rich fodder for conversation. When Madeline walked down the street now, she received friendly greetings rather than pitying glances. One warm afternoon in late August, nearly 2 months after the failed wedding, Blake arrived at the Porter home with his wagon rather than the buggy. "Going somewhere special today?" Madeline asked as she stepped out onto the porch to greet him. "I thought you might like to see my place," he suggested, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident manner. "If you're amenable, that is. Your mother's given her permission." The idea intrigued her. Though she'd known of the Donovan ranch all her life, she'd never actually visited it. "I'd like that very much." The journey took them northeast of town, following the creek for several miles before turning onto a well-maintained road that led to Blake's property. As they crested a small hill, the ranch came into view, a sturdy 2-story house painted white with green trim, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. A large barn stood to one side, and beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," Madeline said sincerely as Blake helped her down from the wagon. "It's home," he replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "My grandfather built the original cabin, and my father added to it over the years. I put on the new porch and painted it after he passed." A middle-aged woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Blake, you're back earlier than I expected. Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Madeline Porter," Blake introduced. "Maddie, Mrs. Holloway keeps house for me and makes sure I don't starve to death when I'm too busy with the cattle to cook." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Porter," Mrs. Holloway said with a knowing smile. "Mr. Blake's spoken of you often." "Has he now?" Madeline glanced at Blake, who looked slightly embarrassed. "I'll have some lemonade and cookies ready when you've finished your tour, Mrs. Holloway promised before disappearing back into the house. Blake offered Madeline his arm. "Shall we?" He showed her around the property with evident pride: the vegetable garden he'd expanded last spring, the orchard his mother had planted, the workshop where he carved wooden pieces during the winter months. Madeline was struck by how much the ranch reflected Blake himself: solid, well cared for, without pretension but beautiful in its functionality. When they reached the corral where several horses dozed in the afternoon sun, a magnificent black stallion trotted over to the fence, nickering softly. "This is Midnight," Blake said, reaching out to stroke the horse's nose. "Best cutting horse in the territory." The stallion nudged Blake's shoulder affectionately, then turned curious eyes toward Madeline. "He's beautiful," she said, admiring the animal's glossy coat and intelligent gaze. "Would you like to pet him? He's gentle despite his size." Madeline hesitantly extended her hand, smiling when the horse stretched his neck to sniff her fingers before allowing her to stroke his velvety nose. "He likes you," Blake observed, watching them with a pleased expression. "The feeling is mutual," she replied, delighted when Midnight leaned into her touch. After visiting the barn to see a new litter of kittens born to the stable cat, Blake led Madeline to a rise behind the house where a single oak tree spread its branches wide. Beneath it sat a simple wooden bench facing west. "My thinking spot," he explained as they sat down. "Best view on the property, especially at sunset." From this vantage point, they could see not only Blake's ranch, but the surrounding countryside stretching toward the mountains. Rattlesnake Creek was visible as a green ribbon winding through the landscape, and in the far distance, the church steeple in town caught the afternoon light. "I can see why you love it here," Madeline said, taking in the peaceful scene. "There's something complete about it." Blake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "It's not fancy, but it's got everything a person really needs. Good water, fertile soil, room to breathe. And room to grow," she added, noting the unbuilt areas that could one day hold more houses, more barns, more life. "That's the idea," he agreed, then hesitated before continuing. "A place like this. It deserves a family to fill it. Children running around, laughter in the evenings, someone to share the work and the rewards." The implication hung in the air between them. Madeline felt her heart quicken as Blake turned to face her more directly on the bench. "Maddie, I know it might still be too soon. After what happened with Thomas, I'd understand if you're hesitant to consider another attachment. But I want you to know that my feelings for you haven't changed except perhaps to grow stronger these past weeks." He took her hand gently in his callous thumb tracing patterns on her skin. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Just for you to think about what kind of future you want, and whether I might have a place in it." Madeline looked down at their joined hands, struck by how right it felt, his strength supporting her, not overpowering her. "Blake, A shout from the direction of the house interrupted her. One of the ranch hands was waving to get Blake's attention. "Mr. Donovan! Got a situation with the new bull. Need you right away." Blake sighed, clearly frustrated by the timing. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I have to see to this." "Of course." She nodded, understanding the responsibilities that came with running a ranch. He helped her up from the bench, still holding her hand. We should continue this conversation soon, if you're willing. I am, she assured him, surprised by how certain she felt. They walked back to the house, where Mrs. Holloway was waiting with the promised refreshments. You sit and enjoy your lemonade, Miss Porter, she insisted. Mr. Blake won't be long with that bull, I expect. Left alone on the front porch with her thoughts, Madeline sipped her lemonade and considered Blake's words. Was it too soon to think of another attachment? Thomas had proposed just 6 months after they met, and she'd accepted without truly knowing him. With Blake, despite their longer acquaintance, they were only just beginning to explore what might exist between them. Yet there was a solid foundation there that had never existed with Thomas, a shared understanding of the land, of what made a life worth living, of values that went deeper than surface charm or grand promises. Her thoughts were interrupted by Mrs. Holloway bringing out a plate of cookies. Try these, dear. Mr. Blake's favorite molasses with ginger. Thank you, Madeline said, accepting one. They're delicious. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. Known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Madeline blushed. We're still getting to know each other, really. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head catches up, the older woman observed with a knowing smile. My Harold proposed to me after just 2 weeks of courting. Folks said we were rushing, but we had 52 good years together before the Lord took him. Before Madeline could respond, she spotted Blake returning from the corrals, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a satisfied expression on his face. Bull settled, he announced as he climbed the porch steps. Just needed a firm hand to remind him who's boss. I'll leave you young people to your visiting, Mrs. Holloway said, gathering the empty lemonade glasses and retreating into the house with a meaningful glance at Blake. Once they were alone, Blake sat beside Madeline on the porch swing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I'm sorry about the interruption earlier. It's part of ranch life, she replied with a smile. I understand. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the swing moving gently beneath them. Madeline gathered her courage to address what had been left unspoken. What you said earlier, about the future, she began hesitantly. I've been thinking about it too. About what I want. Blake turned to her, his expression carefully neutral despite the hope in his eyes. And what is it you want, Maddie? I want something real, she said simply. Not grand promises or elaborate plans, but something solid and true. A partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. She met his gaze directly. The kind of foundation that can weather any storm. Like a marriage should be, he suggested quietly. Yes. The word was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of certainty. Blake took her hand again, his grip warm and sure. I'm not Thomas Gentry. I won't promise you the world, Maddie. Just my heart, my home, and my solemn oath to stand beside you through whatever life brings. Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes, not from sadness but from a deep recognition of the truth in his words. That's worth more than all the empty promises in the world. Blake's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. May I kiss you, Maddie? Her heart pounding, she nodded. Yes. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Madeline had never been more certain of anything as she closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was gentle at first, a question being asked and answered, before deepening into something that spoke of longing finally acknowledged. When they pulled apart, Blake's eyes were full of wonder. I've wanted to do that since the day you came back from St. Louis in that blue dress. Madeline laughed softly. That was over 2 years ago. I'm a patient man, he replied with a smile that made her heart skip. Some things are worth waiting for. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Blake and Madeline remained on the porch swing, talking of possibilities and plans, of hopes and dreams, of a future that suddenly seemed as bright and promising as the land stretching before them. The following Sunday, Blake joined the Porter family for dinner after church, a development that surprised no one in town given how frequently they'd been seen together in recent weeks. What did raise eyebrows was when Blake asked to speak privately with Mr. Porter after the meal. Madeline sat in the parlor with her mother, pretending to concentrate on her needlework while straining to hear the conversation taking place in her father's study. The murmur of male voices was audible but indistinct, until suddenly her father's laugh boomed out, followed by what sounded like a congratulatory slap on the back. When Blake and her father emerged, both wearing expressions of satisfaction, Madeline felt her pulse quicken. Blake crossed the room to where she sat, taking both her hands and drawing her to her feet. "Your father has given his blessing," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you'll have me, Maddie." Though they had discussed marriage during their time at the ranch, the formal proposal still caught her by surprise. She was aware of her parents watching her mother already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, but in that moment, there was only Blake, waiting patiently for her answer. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotions welling within her. "Yes, I'll have you, Blake Donovan." His face broke into a radiant smile as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside nestled a ring, not an elaborate diamond like the one Thomas had given her, but a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. "It was my grandmother's," Blake explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The pearl reminded me of you, genuine and beautiful without needing embellishment." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Madeline looked down at it, then back up at Blake's face. "It's perfect." Her mother rushed forward to embrace them both, tears flowing freely now. "Oh, my dears! This is wonderful news!" Her father approached more sedately, but his smile was genuine as he shook Blake's hand. "Welcome to the family, son." Later, after Blake had departed with promises to return the following day to discuss wedding plans, Madeline sat with her mother in the kitchen, both women sipping tea as twilight settled over the house. "Are you sure, Maddie?" her mother asked gently. "After what happened with Thomas, no one would blame you for wanting to wait longer." Madeline touched the pearl ring, already feeling as if it had always been there. "I'm sure, Ma. What I feel for Blake is nothing like what I felt for Thomas. That was excitement, anticipation of something new and different." She smiled, recognizing the truth of her words as she spoke them. "With Blake, it's like coming home to a place I didn't know I was missing." Her mother nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's how it should be. That's what lasts. We'll have a small ceremony," Madeline decided. "Nothing elaborate. Just family and close friends at the church." "No white dress?" her mother asked, surprised. Madeline shook her head firmly. "No. Something new, something simple." She didn't need to explain why she couldn't bear to wear another white wedding gown, even a different one. "Well, we could order that blue fabric we saw at the mercantile last month," her mother suggested. "It would complement your eyes beautifully." As they discussed the practical details of the upcoming wedding, Madeline felt none of the nervous flutter that had accompanied her preparations to marry Thomas. Instead, there was a calm certainty, a rightness that settled in her bones and warmed her from within. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Rattlesnake Creek, met with general approval and congratulations. Even those who had been most avid in gossiping about the Gentry incident now spoke approvingly of Madeline's good fortune in securing such a respected match. Lucy was especially delighted when Madeline asked her to stand as her witness at the ceremony. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, hugging her friend tightly. "From the moment he rode off with you that day, I just knew you two were meant for each other." "You saw it before I did," Madeline admitted with a smile. "Sometimes it takes a jolt to make us see what's been in front of us all along," Lucy observed wisely. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Though true to her word, Madeline kept everything simple. She and Blake agreed on an October date, when the weather would be cool and the autumn colors would paint the landscape in golds and reds. 2 weeks before the wedding, as Madeline was trying on her completed dress of becoming blue silk with modest lace trim, a commotion outside drew her to the window. A carriage she didn't recognize had pulled up in front of the house, and a well-dressed man was descending from it. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Thomas Gentry. "Maddie?" her mother called from downstairs. "There's someone here to see you." For a moment, Madeline considered refusing to come down. What could Thomas possibly have to say that she needed to hear? But curiosity and a certain desire for closure propelled her to quickly change back into her day dress and descend to the parlor, where her father was standing with barely contained hostility as Thomas waited nervously. "Miss Porter," Thomas said, removing his hat as she entered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "I didn't agree," she replied coolly. "But now that you're here, you may say what you came to say." Thomas looked thinner than she remembered, and there was a haunted quality to his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "And an apology." "What I did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," she agreed, making no move to sit or invite him to do so. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had once found charming but now saw as merely anxious. "The railroad company discovered irregularities in my accounts. I was facing arrest if I didn't flee immediately. I couldn't drag you into that scandal, so I left without explanation." "How noble of you," Madeline said, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. "I've made restitution," he continued quickly. "Paid back every cent with interest. The charges have been dropped, and I've been given a second chance with a different company in California." He took a step toward her. "I came to ask if you might consider giving me a second chance as well." Madeline stared at him in disbelief. "You abandoned me at the altar without a word, Thomas. You humiliated me in front of the entire town. And now you waltz back in and expect me to simply forget all that?" "I know it's a lot to ask," he admitted. "But what we had was special, Madeline. We could still have the future we planned." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Her father, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, moved to answer it. Madeline heard murmured voices, then Blake appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening when he saw Thomas. "Blake," she said, relief washing over her at the sight of him. "You're early." "Donovan," Thomas acknowledged stiffly, obviously recognizing him. Blake crossed the room to stand beside Madeline, his presence solid and reassuring. "Gentry. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." "I came to speak with Madeline," Thomas replied, his eyes darting between them with growing comprehension. "But I see perhaps I'm too late." Madeline straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from Blake's presence. "Yes, you are. I'm engaged to be married in 2 weeks." Thomas's face fell. "I see. I had hoped. Well, it doesn't matter now." He placed his hat back on his head. "I wish you both happiness." As he turned to leave, Madeline found herself speaking again. "Thomas." He paused, looking back at her with a flicker of hope. "Thank you for the apology," she said simply. "I hope you find what you're looking for in California." After Thomas had gone, Blake turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" Madeline considered the question carefully. "Yes," she realized. "I truly am." Seeing him again, it confirmed what I already knew. "Which is?" She smiled up at the man who had been her strength through the darkest days, who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "That some things that seem like endings are really beginnings in disguise." Blake's arms encircled her, pulling her close as her parents discreetly left the room to give them privacy. "Did he want you back?" he asked against her hair. "He did," she admitted. "But even if I weren't already in love with you, I could never go back to him. I'm not the same woman who said yes to Thomas Gentry." Blake pulled back slightly to look into her face. "You said you're in love with me?" Madeline laughed softly at his surprised expression. "Did you doubt it?" "No," he replied, his eyes warm with affection. "But it's nice to hear all the same." "I love you, Blake Donovan," she said clearly, reveling in the freedom to say the words aloud. "And I cannot wait to be your wife." His kiss was tender yet possessive, A promise of the life they would build together, a life founded not on grand gestures or elaborate promises, but on trust, respect, and a love that had grown stronger through adversity. On their wedding day, the church was filled with friends and family, the atmosphere one of genuine joy rather than the strained politeness that had marked her previous almost wedding. Madeline stood at the back of the church, her arm linked with her father's, her blue dress catching the light from the stained glass windows. "Ready, Maddie girl?" her father asked, patting her hand. Looking toward the altar where Blake waited, tall and handsome in his best suit, Madeline nodded. "More than ready, Pa." As the music began and they started their walk down the aisle, Madeline felt none of the doubt or anxiety that had plagued her the last time she'd made this journey. Each step brought her closer to the man who had taken her hand when she needed it most, who had offered her a second chance at happiness when she thought all hope was lost. Blake's face as he watched her approach was a study in love and wonder, his eyes never leaving hers as she drew near. When her father placed her hand in Blake's, the gesture felt like the completion of a circle that had begun that day outside the church, when a heartbroken woman in a white dress had looked up to find a cowboy offering his steady hand. The minister's words washed over them as they stood facing each other, hands joined, hearts aligned. When it came time for their vows, Blake's voice rang clear and true through the church. "I, Blake Michael Donovan, take you, Madeline Elizabeth Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live." His thumb stroked the back of her hand as he added, "And I promise to stand beside you through whatever storms may come, to be your partner in all things, and to thank God every day for the second chance that brought us together." Tears of joy blurred Madeline's vision as she repeated her own vows, adding, "I promise to build our life on truth and trust, to value the solid foundation we've created, and to never take for granted the love that found us when we needed it most." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake's kiss was both tender and triumphant, a sealing of promises made and a beginning of promises to be kept. As they turned to face their friends and family as Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, Madeline felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. The celebration afterward at the town hall was filled with music, laughter, and good wishes. As Blake led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Madeline couldn't help but remember the evening of the social when he had stood beside her, helping her face the town's scrutiny. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her smile. "I'm thinking how far we've come since that day you found me on the church steps," she replied. "Not so far," he disagreed gently. "I knew even then that you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I just had to be patient enough to let you discover it for yourself." As the evening progressed, Madeline danced with her father, with Blake's brothers, with friends who had supported her through the difficult days after Thomas's abandonment. But her eyes always returned to Blake, finding him watching her with a love that made her heart full. When it came time for them to leave for the ranch, their home now, the townspeople lined the street to wave goodbye, showering them with rice and good wishes. Blake helped Madeline into the buggy he had decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "Ready for our new beginning, Mrs. Donovan?" he asked, his smile warming her more than the blanket he tucked around her against the October chill. "More than ready, Mr. Donovan," she replied, leaning against his solid shoulder as they drove away from the town and toward their future. The ranch house welcomed them with lamplight glowing in the windows, Mrs. Holloway having prepared it for their arrival before discreetly departing to stay with her sister in town for a few days. Blake carried Madeline across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. "Welcome home, wife," he said softly, his voice rich with emotion. "Home," she repeated, looking around at the sturdy walls, the comfortable furnishings, the evidence everywhere of Blake's care and attention. "It already feels like it." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Blake's arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had seemed like the worst day of her life had ultimately led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. "Blake?" she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. Came his drowsy response. Thank you for asking for a second chance that day. He tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her hair. Best thing I ever did. But you're the brave one, Maddie. You took my hand even when you had every reason to distrust men's promises. I knew somehow that your promises were different, she murmured. That they were built on something solid. Like this house, he said, understanding her meaning perfectly. Built to last through whatever storms may come. As Madeline drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, she felt a deep sense of peace and rightness. The path that had led her here might have been unexpected, filled with heartbreak and uncertainty, but she wouldn't change a moment of it if it meant ending up anywhere but here, home at last, with the man who had seen her worth even when she couldn't see it herself. I love you, Blake Donovan, she whispered against his chest. And I love you, Maddie Donovan, he replied, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. In the years that followed, Rattlesnake Creek would see many changes. The railroad would finally come through, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Businesses would open and close. Children would be born, grow up, and start families of their own. But one constant remained: the steadfast love between Blake and Madeline Donovan, a love that had begun on the steps of a church when a heartbroken woman in a wedding dress had placed her trembling hand in that of a cowboy who believed in second chances. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, arrived just over a year after their wedding, a healthy, strong-lunged baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. Blake's hands, so sure with horses and cattle, trembled when he first held his tiny daughter. She's perfect, he whispered, all evident in his voice as he counted her miniature fingers. She is, Madeline agreed, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband fall instantly in love with their child. 2 years later came William Michael, a sturdy boy who from his earliest days showed signs of inheriting his father's quiet strength and love of the land. The Donovan ranch thrived under Blake's careful management, expanding as he acquired adjacent properties and increased his herds. Madeline found her place not just as a wife and mother, but as a true partner in the ranch operations. Her education and quick mind proved valuable in keeping the books and identifying opportunities for growth that Blake might have overlooked. Together, they built something greater than either could have achieved alone: a prosperous business, a loving home, and a legacy for their children. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Madeline by taking her back to the wildflower meadow where he had first shown her his heart. They left the children with Mrs. Holloway, who had remained a beloved fixture in their household, and packed a picnic much like the one they'd shared years before. The meadow was as beautiful as Madeline remembered, though the season was different: autumn colors replacing summer blooms, the air crisp rather than warm. They spread their blanket beneath the same sky and unpacked their basket. Happy anniversary, Maddie, Blake said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Blake, you didn't need to get me anything, she protested, though her eyes lit up with pleasure. 5 years deserves commemoration, he insisted, placing the gift in her hands. Madeline unwrapped it carefully to reveal a journal bound in soft leather, her initials MED embossed in gold on the cover. Inside, on the first page, Blake had written in his neat, strong hand, "For my Maddie, to record our story as it continues to unfold. With all my love, Blake." Tears pricked at her eyes as she ran her fingers over the blank pages, thinking of all they would hold: the milestones of their children's lives, the growth of their ranch, the daily joys and challenges they would face together. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." Blake drew her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been the day he'd helped her down from the church steps. "Thank you for saying yes, Maddie. To the second chance, to building a life with me, to all of it. Best decision I ever made," she replied with absolute certainty. As they sat together watching the sun begin its descent toward the distant mountains, Madeline reflected on how different her life was from what she had once imagined it would be. The glamorous existence Thomas had promised, travel, fine clothes, city living, seemed hollow compared to the rich reality she had found with Blake. Here, on their land, surrounded by the beauty of the country they both loved, with their children waiting at home and years of possibilities stretching before them, Madeline Porter Donovan knew a contentment that went soul deep. She had been left at the altar without a word, yes, but that ending had led to the truest beginning she could have hoped for, when a cowboy took her hand and asked for a second chance. In the golden light of late afternoon, Blake turned to his wife, his expression one of complete happiness. "Ready to head home?" Madeline nodded, taking his offered hand as they rose together. "Always," she said simply. "As long as it's with you." And as they gathered their things and prepared for the journey back to the ranch, back to their children, their responsibilities, their shared life, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are found only after the road takes an unexpected turn. Her heart full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment, she walked hand in hand with Blake toward home, toward their future, toward all the days yet to be written in the story of their love.